Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having a great day. Today I have my 5 cards, 1 kit using the Brutus Monroe Under the Sea Inspiration Box, which was the July 2019 box. This box is no longer available, but if you'd like to see what came in the kit, you can head back to my channel and watch the unboxing video. And there are a few things that will still be available, so I will have those linked down below if you're interested in a few of these products. So let's go ahead and get started creating what we're going to create today. For card number 1, I have grabbed out a bunch of the cardstock, every one of the pieces actually. Some of them came with 2, but I grabbed all the colors and I'm going to just start stamping each of the little fish and little sea critters that came in this kit, or on this stamp set, which is the Under the Sea stamp set. I'm going to stamp all of those just using the various colors of the cardstock that came in the kit. To stamp that out, I am using my Raven Detail it's not embossing ink, but my Raven Detail ink. This is good for Copic coloring and just for regular stamping. And I love the little critters that are in this stamp set. They're, in true Brutus Monroe fashion, they're just adorable. And they all have these cute little expressions, and they were just so much fun to stamp out. And as you can tell, I'm not planning to do any coloring. I just wanted to do the stamping, and then, I know, cringe for some of you, I am going to fussy cut each of these images out. I don't mind fussy cutting. For me, it's therapeutic. I enjoy it. I just turn on music and do it, and I just cut, and I'm happy. My card base today is some lunch bag cardstock by Brutus Monroe, and I have trimmed that down to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and then scored it at 5 1/2 inches to make a top folding A2 size card. And I'm just going to take each of those little critters and I'm going to arrange them onto my card base. And when I'm ready with what I think would be a good arrangement, I start using some liquid glue to adhere those down. One of the things I found when you plan to do something like this, the best thing to do is to start with your bigger elements, and then you can use your smaller elements to fill in all those little gaps. And I do end up having quite a few little pieces left over. I will end up using a few of those on the inside of my card, but I'm so far super happy with the way this is turning out. For some added texture to the card, I grabbed my Signo Uniball Gel Pen. I haven't had any problem with my gel pens clogging, but that's because I use them, or at least I try to use them frequently, and I only open one at a time, so I only have one going at one time. And all I'm doing is I'm coloring in the little whites of their eyes and a few of the little details that are on each of the little images, and I'll do that for all of the images. And I end up thinking, it just looks so cute and cartoony. I love it. I've grabbed some Brutus Monroe heat-resistant vellum, and I plan to stamp my sentiment right onto this vellum. I didn't want to cover up too much of that background, so I've conditioned the stamp onto my hand just to kind of pick up some of the oils from my hand so it'll make it easier to stamp. I've grabbed some embossing ink by Brutus Monroe, and then I'll stamp my sentiment down onto the vellum after I had already used the magic embossing bag, which you really do want to use. I'm covering that with the Raven Detail Embossing Ink, or the Ultrafine Embossing Ink, and then I'll dump that back into the jar, and then I will start heating this till it is smooth and melted, and it usually melts very quickly on vellum. I'll trim that down when I'm done, and then I'm going to snip down some very tiny pieces. Well, they could have been tinier. They should have been tinier. But I'm snipping down some tiny pieces of foam tape, and I'm going to put that right behind the wording. This, or just using liquid glue right behind those elements, would have been the best way to tack this down without having that glue or the foam tape show through the back of the vellum, because obviously whatever you have on the back, if you put glue all over it, it will show if you just do it in little strips, or if you use the foam tape in little strips. So I'm trying to disguise it by putting it behind the word water. And then when that is done, I'll just peel off all the backing paper, and then I'll adhere that down to the front of my card. I wanted to wait, because I used liquid glue on the front of this card for all of my little elements. I wanted to make sure that it was completely dry before I started snipping. So I'll flip that over, and then I'll just start trimming off all of the excess of those pieces. Might seem like a little bit of a waste, but it's really not a big deal just to trim off just some of that. And you do want to add continuation to your card. It's a good idea to have things on occasion coming off of your cards, and then you can just trim it down. I take a couple more of those pieces and put those on the inside, and that'll finish off card number 1. For card number 2, I'm actually going to use one of the foilables, but I don't plan to foil it. I like these because you have lots of options with these foilables. And all I'm going to do is Copic color this one, and I'm doing very simple Copic coloring. I'm not using any shadowing or shading. I'm basically using one color for each of the elements, and I chose some bright colors because I figured that would take away from the fact that I'm not doing any shading or shadowing. And so, like I said, very super simple Copic coloring, using an orange for the coral, using a yellow for the little stars, green for any of the little leaf elements. I use a blue for the shell here. I move on to a purple for the rest of the shells, and I also use that purple for the little star, the last of the big starfish. So very super simple Copic coloring. And it actually, I mean, not only was it easy, I think it gives a good punch when you just use all those colors. Now I'm trimming down the panel. I'm going to trim it down to 1.5 inches for 3 pieces, but that third piece, I don't know if you noticed, I only trimmed that down to 1.25 inches. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I was just moving quickly, probably jamming away to some music and not really paying attention. And I'm also trimming off another, I don't know, about 1/2 inch off of each of the ends. Now I'm trimming down some of that blue glitter stock, and I'm trimming that down so that I will have that as a panel to go on the back of each of those 3 pieces. So I will trim those down to 1 3/4 inches by 3, a little bit more than 3 3/4. And so that way it gives a nice little blue border around each of those pieces. And I save all those little glitter stock pieces, like even the strips, I save those because I can use those. And this is where I trim down that extra piece because I figure it's, you know, it's a straight line. You really won't be able to tell too much. And I do end up covering part of that with some ribbon later on anyway. Now to adhere my pieces, I'm just using some of my liquid glue. And on that third piece, discover that I cut that a little too big. Well, at this point, at least it was better that it was too big than too small again. So I just add a strip of glue, discover it's too big, so I trim it down a little bit more, and then voila, finally my little mistake is covered. It's not perfect, but it's fine. So now I've grabbed that ribbon that came in the kit, and I'm just going to take some washi tape, and sorry it's kind of off screen, but I take some washi tape and I adhere it just to the back of that piece, and that ribbon will cover up my little cut mark, my little mess up. And then I will start adhering everything down to the front after I decide on the sentiment that I want. But before I do that, I decide to tie a little bow. And as far as tying bows, I've talked about this before, you just have to keep manipulating it. I keep it attached to the ribbon spool itself so I don't waste any ribbon, but I just start tying a bow and then just keep manipulating it until you're happy with it, and then you can trim down your elements as you see fit. I grabbed the See You Soon, which is such a cute little pun, and I'm inking that up with that Raven detail ink, and I'm just stamping that onto the white cardstock that came in the kit. And then I will trim that down and get that ready to adhere everything. So I'm just using the liquid glue that I used once before to adhere my pieces to the front of my white card base. And this is still a side folding A2 size card. And I'm eyeballing it, but you know, to make it a little bit better, I do the edges first and then I stick the center piece in to center that even more. I used foam tape on my sentiment. And then I started off using that same liquid glue I've been using this whole time, but then I realized that liquid glue takes a little while to dry, especially on a piece of fabric or a ribbon. So I grabbed my Ranger Multi-Medium Matte because that gives you a little bit of time, but not a lot of time. And then that finishes off this card. I do take some of those pieces and I put those on the inside of the card. You didn't see me do that, but then that way I've decorated the inside. Card number 3 may be my absolute favorite because I will be making a scene card, and I love making scene cards. So I have a piece of Express It cardstock that I have trimmed down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I am going to line up that bottom scene part from the stamp set because it covers the whole bottom part, and I love that about it. So I'm putting that into my Misti, and I'm going to condition that stamp because I've never used it before, so I'm just using the oils from my hand. And then I will ink that up with the detail ink, the Raven Detail ink from Brutus Monroe, because that's Copic friendly. And then I will stamp it down. And I end up stamping it twice just to make sure that I have good coverage. And then off screen, I actually stamp a couple more little images. I stamp 2 of the fish, and I stamp the octopus up above so that I can color those as well. Before I get to coloring, I want to make my background. So I have some Salty Ocean and some Blueprint Sketch. I believe that's what I have. Yeah, Salty Ocean and Blueprint Sketch Distress Oxide inks. And I'm starting with a lighter color on top, which is the Salty Ocean. And I'm using my Vivas Beauty brushes. And then I'll clean that off, and then I will go from the bottom up using the Blueprint Sketch. Because this is supposed to be like an ocean scene, or an ocean floor scene, it would be darker at the bottom. And so that's how I've blended it out. And I was looking at my stencil. This is the stencil of the month. It's new for July and only available in July. And I thought this would be perfect to make some like light rays. Oh, and it would be a little bit different. So I put my pad down onto my glass mat because I wasn't sure how the ink would transfer by using the Vivas Beauty brush. And it didn't, but I love how that looks. And so I'll clean off my brush a little bit more, and then I'm going to soften that out just by very lightly going over the top, so it'll just soften those edges to make it look a little bit more like light coming down from the top. For some added texture, I take a paintbrush and some water, and this is a thin paintbrush. I think it's a number 2, and I'm just going to flick water all over that background. I wanted little droplets. I didn't want big ones, so that's why I chose a smaller brush. And then I'll let that sit for a second, and then I'll pick that up with my microfiber cloth. And I love how that background looks, so I'll set that off to the side to dry. And now for my coloring. I have sped this up about 8 times. Clearly I'm not that fast. And I'm just doing some fairly simple Copic coloring. On the rocks I do use 3 shades, and those are in the W family. I'm not planning to use this whole bottom scene. I know that I'll want to use this stamp set again and again, and I'll probably use that scene later on, the whole scene, but I just wanted those edges because I have a plan. And I'm just coloring all those pieces, just using some fairly vibrant colors, and I'm doing just a slight bit of shading for some of those. So I've got some oranges, some yellows, some very light greens, some purples, and then that's going to finish off that part of the scene. And I'll go on to color my fish, just using some yellow and turquoise, and the octopus I decided to make like a rosy pink color. And then I'll color one more of the fish just using some of those greens again. And I just did some very simple Copic coloring. Didn't even do a whole lot in the way of darker shading because my scene there's so much going on in it that it isn't necessary. So as far as cutting out the bottom part of the scene, you know, the ocean floor, I do leave a white border on the upper part, but the part that's attached to the sand that's at the bottom, I cut right along the edge there. And now I'm showing you that sand paste. That's how it dries. And I want to add this to the very bottom of my scene. So this is why I didn't do the whole stamped image. I am just kind of using a palette knife, and I'm scraping that all across the bottom of my scene where I know that it's going to be covered. And I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. Now, I will be honest, I walked away for about a day because I had something going on, but that's how it dries. I'm sure you could speed up the drying process using a heat tool, you know, off and on, not going full force all at once, but I'm sure that you could. Before I get too crazy with attaching things, I want to stamp out my sentiment, so I've used my embossing bag over the top. That thing is clutch, and it's the best one I've ever had because it really does do a great job. Now I've put my sentiment into my Misti, and I'm going to ink that up with my embossing ink from Brutus Monroe. I'll stamp that down, and then I'm going to end up covering that with the Brutus Monroe Raven Detail Embossing Powder. This stuff is a great black embossing powder, and it's very fine detail, and because I used the magic powder bag, I don't have any strays, so it worked out great. And then I'm going to heat that until that is smooth and melted, and you'll be able to tell because it's a little bit shiny once it starts to melt. And I love how that looks. I didn't want to cover up the background too much. That's why I stamped it right onto my background. And here's a little trick that you can do because this scene takes up the whole part of the card, and I wanted to make sure that it stayed down because I do have a little bit of warping because of the sand paste. I'm using some 1/8 inch score tape, and I will just peel back part of that and then fold that up. So watch as I do this. I'm folding up just a part of the edges. Now the bottom or the back Like the middle, I completely take that off. But on those 4 edges, I fold back just a little, and then this way I can, before I'm really committed to putting that down, I can now just peel that away. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I got a little overzealous pulling that, so I had to peel back a little. But that was the best way I could find that I didn't have a screw up in attaching that to my card base. Now I will peel off all of the foam tape that I have put onto my little floor scene. I wanted to make sure those were popped up a little bit, and I knew that they would stay very well on top of that gritty sand paste by using the foam tape. And I'll just attach those, but to attach my octopus and my little fish, I'm just attaching those right to the back because I want those to look like they're kind of in the background. And I'm just using liquid glue with those. I'm going to make the one fish kind of look like he's coming off the top. That wasn't necessary since the bottom part of the scene already looks like it's coming off. And so that wasn't necessary, but I did it anyway. And then I'll just turn that over and trim that off. And then for the inside, last little bit, as if there wasn't enough going on in this scene, I grab a couple pieces of that sea glass that came in the kit as well, and I'm just using some Ranger Multi-Medium Matte to adhere it. That way I know it'll stay on that sand paste, and I picked pieces that weren't too thick, that they were only about as thick as the foam tape. And for my last bit, I will stamp on the inside the little eel and then the blue wave, so that way I've got the inside decorated a little bit. And that's going to finish off card number 3. I love how this turned out. So fun, and actually probably pretty easy to replicate. Card number 4 was a super fun one because it uses the laser cuts that came in the kit. I plan to layer those, but I'm going to start off with some Mustard Seed Distress Oxide ink along with my Vivos beauty brushes, and I'm just blending that right onto the coral. And then I thought that wasn't, because it started to dry into the laser cut, which is fine. So I took some spiced marmalade and tried to do that on the edges, and it just wasn't quite dark enough for me. So I realized with this, it was one of those that I kind of had to build layers up on. So now I'm just sticking my ink pad directly onto the coral, and I like how that is ending up turning out. The next color that I grabbed for the other laser cut was this cracked pistachio, and I'm just kind of blending that out so that I have a little bit of a border still. And then I'm going to try and get a little bit of an edge to it, so I grabbed some peeled paint, and I'm just sticking that on the edge for some color variation. And then for a final bit, I grabbed some Mermaid Lagoon, and I am inking that all along the edge because I thought, well, this is supposed to be a water scene, so we'll go ahead and grab some blue and add to it. Because originally I thought about leaving the craft color, but then I thought I really wanted more color, so that's why we ended up with the Mermaid Lagoon. Now I'm going to layer those, and they're not thick, so that's nice, but I'm using some Ranger Multi-Medium Matte, and then I'm just going to stick that right on top so that that coral sticks behind, and it just looks like this cute little layered image. I want to make this a shaker card, so I've grabbed some 1/8 inch score tape, and I'm just putting that along those edges because I do have a piece of acetate that I have cut down to fit perfectly behind there. So I'm just putting it where the acetate will be because all I really want to do is just make sure that that's secure. I'll peel off that backing paper, and then I'll grab my acetate that you can't really see that's sitting on my desk, and then I'll stick that down. The next thing to do would be to double up my foam tape. I want to make sure that this has a decent amount of dimension, and I am trimming that down because those edges are very thin, so I want to make sure that my foam tape is thin enough to go around those edges. So now that I've got that trimmed down, I'm going to peel off the backing paper, and then I'll start adhering that all along those edges. And then once I have those edges complete, I will start cutting more foam tape just to fit the back, the rest of where you can't see, because I don't want it to collapse. And so it's all good to go. I'll start peeling off the backing paper, and then I'm going to start sticking some of the elements, because my card base is some lunch bag cardstock from Brutus Monroe, and I'm taking some of those bubbles and the sea glass, and I'm pouring that right into the center. And I do want to flip all those bubbles over. I only doubled up my foam tape just the once, so those bubbles will not be flipping and turning around, which is kind of nice. So I just wanted to make sure that they were all on the right side. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the multimedia matte and just stick 3 of them down so that they kind of stay put. And then I have, you know, not everything just sinks to the bottom, which is kind of nice because once the rest of the elements get put in there, some of them will catch on those bubbles and they'll stay put, which is nice so that when it's setting down, it isn't all sunk to the bottom. Next, I'll grab those mermaid sequins, the mermaid sequins mix. I'm going to pull out some of the biggest ones. I don't want those in there, like that giant square one. But the rest of them, I'm just going to put those right in there. I thought that was fun little element because some of those are transparent, and then the rest are that really pretty blue color. And then last but not least, I'm going to grab some of those micro pearls, and I'm going to pour those right into the center. And I'm being pretty generous with it because it's a pretty open area. And then I will start to try and adhere my top to the front. But what I did to start, or before I started doing that, was I took my magic powder bag and just put that right on the edges, not on the outside, but just on the edges so that those pieces don't stick to the edges like they might. And then once I get that adhered to the top, you want to make sure and really press down all along where your foam tape is so that nothing comes out. And then there we have a shaker card. For my sentiment, I've grabbed some more of that heat-resistant vellum. And I also grabbed some sand embossing powder by Brutus Monroe. This stuff is so cool. It's Sandcastle is what it's called. And I just used my embossing ink and then poured the Sandcastle embossing powder right over the top. And it actually looks like sand. And then when you heat it, it's like a shiny version of sand. It's a really, really pretty color. I love it. So then I trimmed that down, gave it a flag banner, flag end, and then I'm going to trim it down even more. And because this is vellum, like I've said before, in order to hide my adhesive, I'm going to take some of that multimedia matte and just trace the back of where the word water is. And that way, when I stick it to the front, you won't be able to see where the adhesive is, which is nice. And then once that's down, that's going to finish off this card. But yeah, everybody loves a good shaker, right? I love how that turned out. Very fun. Card number 5 turned into cards number 5 and 6 because I ended up doing some foiling with one of these foilables. But to start off, I'm going to do some blending on this foilable. I showed you how you can Copic color on them, and now I want to show you that you can blend on them. So I have some cracked pistachio Distress Oxide ink along with my Vivos Beauty brushes, and I'm starting with the darker on the edges and kind of blending that into the center, just dragging that color in. I'll clean up my mess, and then I'm going to take one of my smaller brushes and I'm just going to pounce a little color on each of those fish. I'm not concerned that it's going outside the lines. I kind of want it to do that. It would be almost impossible not to, but I wanted to have a little bit of color on those fish, so that's why I chose the smaller brush along with this Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide ink. And it looks like it's kind of covering up those lines a lot, but I'll show you that it's easy to fix because I do want to foil, like I said. So once I'm happy with how I've gotten those fish fairly covered, I'll wipe up my mess. And then I'm actually going to take that microfiber cloth and I'm just going to brush it over the top lightly so that I can wipe off the ink from where it's covering those lines. I pulled out some Deco foil pink melon, and then I'm going to run that through my Amazon Basics laminator about 4 times. I made sure that my laminator was good and hot, so it had been on for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then I'm left with these 2 pieces. The foiling was beautiful, and I just couldn't throw away the leftover piece, so I'm going to trim that down, and I'm actually going to put this on my next card. And I don't have any stick-it adhesive. I have a little bit left, but not a lot. And so I'm going to show you a different way that you can take those pieces and you can make a card with them. So it'll cover that card. I notice how I didn't cut the top. I'm going to take this card this cardstock that I had from the kit. I'm just taking some 1/8 inch score tape that I had, and I'm putting it on the back. I am going to basically wrap the edges around to the back. And yes, that could peel off, but the way to fix that is to adhere it to a card base so that'll keep it from going anywhere. And it is a little bowed, but to fix that as well, I'm going to stamp out my sentiment using a scrap of that cardstock that came in the kit. I am using my embossing ink. I covered the cardstock with my magic powder bag, stamped my sentiment with the embossing ink, and I'm going to cover that with some alabaster embossing powder, and then I will put the rest of that away. I finally got my hands on some of that alabaster embossing powder, and it's incredible. I can see why everybody loves it. I'll heat the embossing powder till it is smooth and melted, and then when that is done, I'm going to trim down my sentiment, but I am making this as wide as my card. So my card base is 4 1/4 inches, so is this piece. I've covered that entire back with some Scotch foam tape, and then I'm going to make sure that my end goes all the way to the end on both sides. So that way that's one extra piece that will keep that down. My card base is just some white cardstock that I have, and I put some score tape all over the back of that, and now I'm adhering my panel onto that base. And there's a card, so it's even shiny. To finish up the first card that I started, I did use some liquid adhesive, and I put my panel on a little bit wonky. And then when I'm happy with how that has set, I'm going to take my scissors, these are my Brutus Monroe scissors, and I'm going to trim off the excess. And I'm trying to be a little bit careful because I decide I do want to take that extra piece, and I'm going to adhere that to the inside of my card to finish off the one card. So that way I've got a little decoration on the outside and the inside. So I'll take that piece, cover it with some more liquid adhesive, and then I'll stick it on the inside of my card. Sorry you can't really see it. Sometimes I get into mode and I'm not paying attention to what is actually on the screen. Then for my sentiment, I'm taking just some black cardstock. I'm stamping the sentiment onto it with embossing ink like I've done before. And then I'll cover that with the alabaster embossing powder. Notice I have the giant jar of embossing powder. I won't run out for a while. And then I heat that till that is smooth and melted as well. Love that magic embossing bag. It keeps the strays away. That is fantastic. So I've trimmed down my sentiment, gave it a little bit of a wonky side, and now I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of it. And then I'll adhere that down to the front of my card base. But I don't stop there. I grab the Mermaid Sequin Mix and my Crystal Katana along with my liquid glue, and I am going to adhere all of those sequins down to the front of my card. And that Crystal Katana makes it so much easier to do so. And then when that's it, or when that's done, that's it. So there are cards 5 and 6 for you. So I do have 4 bonus cards for you that I didn't show you how I made them, but I just made them. And these next 2 cards were made the exact same way as these last 2 cards, as you can see. And the next card I made just by taking those wood veneer and adhering those to some paper punched circles. And then I even took a strip of 1/2 inch score tape and really burnished some micro beads into it. I'm waiting to adhere a sentiment to it because I'm not sure what I want to use this card for. The next card is the same way, except this one was just foiled. I foiled this one, and then I added some sequins, and I even added some glossy accents, and I will add a sentiment to it later. Now let's go ahead and take a look at all the cards that I made today. I would love to know which one of these was your favorite. If you had one, go ahead and list that down below. If you have any questions, go ahead and list that in the comment section down below. I will have everything that I use that is still available listed down in the description box down below. And if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'll have more of these videos coming out. So just that way you don't miss anything. And as always, guys, I do appreciate you stopping by and leaving some love. And I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.